Hello. The purpose of this video segment is to help you break down and analyze the long answer essay question for your midterm exam. Now, with regard to everything else on the midterm, you're pretty well set when it comes to preparation, considering the midterm review guide has a term bank. And I know that probably looks pretty overwhelming right now, but in that term bank are all the terms that are going to be important because I'll use them as the building blocks for the multiple choice section of the exam. I don't need you to be able to write a 3-page essay for each or any one of those terms. You really need to know what it is on a very basic level, and you need to know how it fits into the context of our class. If you can tell me those things, you're going to be perfectly prepared for the midterm exam when it comes to the multiple choice section. The short answer essay section is also quite straightforward in the sense that those 4 questions that you're looking at right now, they won't change. They're going to be word for word, verbatim for what you're going to see when you take the exam. The only catch is one of them, and I'm not going to tell you which one, but one of them will go away, it will disappear, and you'll be asked to choose 2 of the 3 questions. But again, the good news is they're not going to change between now and then. The long answer essay, I want you to treat that similarly to how you approach the paper 1, the Upton Sinclair, the Jungle paper. I ask you to take a strong stance on that central question, and I told you going into this, not only were there multiple ways of answering that question, but I don't have a preset correct answer in the forefront of my mind when I go to grade them. Now, the question is the growth of government good, is it bad, or is it a mixed bag? As I've said before, there are different ways that you can answer that question, and I really don't care how you do that as long as you take a firm stance on the central question and you provide ample evidence to demonstrate why you think what you think. Okay? So there should be an introduction paragraph. You should introduce the topic that over the course of the late 19th and early 20th century, one trend that you saw in American history was a growing federal government. And then at the end of that introduction paragraph, you should say, this was good because, or this was bad because, okay? So let's start out with the it's good, right? We know that there were specific groups of Americans, immigrants, people of color, women, children, workers that were very vulnerable to this newly emerging industrial, laissez-faire, capitalistic economy. And just read The Jungle and you can see the problems that are being caused by this new economy. And these people have very few ways, very few options of addressing these issues. With the growth of government came protection for those people. Okay, so you could say that as the government grew, more people who desperately needed protection were able to be protected, and in that way, freedom actually expanded for those individuals. Let me give you 3 examples. And if I were you and had to write this paper, that's exactly what I would do. I'd provide an introduction paragraph, and then I would choose 3 pieces of evidence, at least 3, and just use those bits of evidence to explain to me why you think what you think. So issue number 1, I would say that the Populist Party was onto something when it comes to the growth of the government. Keep in mind, the populists wanted to do things like nationalize the railroads, just to a lesser extent, nationalize the banks, a much more prominent role for government to play in day-to-day life. Now, this could be controversial, but if you think for a second that the farmers, the people that represent, the people that were largely supportive of the Populist Party, the farmers are being gouged by both the railroads and the banks. That's going to provide protection for those individuals. So a stronger federal government from the perspective of the Populist Party would be good because now people that had been taken advantage of and exploited for all these years, now all of a sudden they're going to go ahead and have some protection. Moeller versus Oregon in 1908. Many of you may recall that was the Supreme Court case that said you could no longer legally work women for longer than a 10-hour shift. Now, this is the government expanding, telling private producers what they could do and what they could not do with their own factories. The reason that this is so important is because at the time the thought was the government needed to protect women, because if you work them too hard, again this is back during that period, if you work them too hard you could jeopardize their reproductive capabilities. Okay? So here we have another group of people that are clearly exploited, clearly vulnerable to this new economy, and government is expanding to protect them. Lastly, you could choose any piece of progressive era reform within reason to point to the growth of government in a positive way. Let's talk about the Meat Quality and Inspection Act. When this law is passed, what it does is it regulates, using government power, what can and cannot go into your food that you're eating every day. Nobody had been doing that before the progressive era, the early 20th century, and consequently, as Upton Sinclair vividly noted, there's all kinds of disgusting things that are going into your food. So by government expanding and saying, look, you can't do that any longer, you have to abide by these minimum standards, middle-class consumers were actually protected. Now, I gave you three pieces of information right off the top of my head. If you read your notes or go back and watch some of my video lectures, you're going to have, you know, the problem that you're probably going to have is too much information and how do you sort through it. But for the time being, let's flip the coin and let's talk about ways that the growth of government could be potentially bad, potentially harmful to American freedom. Okay? So in 1882, Congress passes a law called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what this does is it pretty much puts a lid on immigration from China. Okay, if you're Chinese of Chinese descent, the government is saying you cannot immigrate to the United States. Clearly, that is a restriction on freedom. I guess that's on an international level, but if you think for a minute, we have always been a nation of immigrants. That can be a slippery slope. Okay. So anyway, the Chinese Exclusion Act is one example that you could point to when it comes to the growth of government in a bad way. Another example, the Dawes Act. Now, again, the Dawes Act passed in the 1870s. What this does is it gives the President of the United States the power and authority to purchase Native American territory whenever and wherever he wants to. Doesn't matter if they don't even want to sell it. Now, as you should know, one of the provisions of the Dawes Act said that if Native Americans could keep their territories, but to do that they would have to give up their culture. So you had to choose. You could keep your land and give up your culture, or give up your culture and keep your land. But at any rate, this is the government telling people how to live their lives. So lastly, and again, the choice is yours when it comes to what you want to emphasize. I'm just simply kind of shooting from the hip here. The Sedition Act that's passed in 1918 in the middle of World War I, what this law pretty much does is suspend the First Amendment of free speech. Woodrow Wilson is trying to curb dissent so that the war can be won, everybody can be on the same page, but in the process what this is doing is it's prohibiting the criticism of the war, prohibiting criticism of the president, groups that are very radical or at least unpopular like the industrial workers of the world become targets of these government agents that are citing the Sedition Act when they go to an anti-war demonstration, and they're just throwing people in jail. So there's an awful lot of political prisoners that come directly from the Sedition Act, and it's clearly an example of the growth of government, but in a really bad way. The last thing that I want to mention before I let you go is a conclusion. I would conclude your thoughts in this essay. Once again, it needs to be treated just the same way that you treated paper 1. So introduce your topic, give me at least 3 bullet points of, and I don't mean that literally, but give me 3 body paragraphs of supporting evidence, however you want to choose, and then give me a conclusion that kind of tells me what the big picture is. If you believe that the growth of government is bad, maybe you could say something to the effect of, while these things might not seem all that dramatic on the surface level, they do represent a very slippery slope. Okay? So I hope that this has been helpful. As always, please email me if you have individual specific questions as it relates to the central question. And good luck to everybody. I really hope that you all do well.